This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I wish that we had hours and hours to talk about this because I think you're really an expert in all things EMS training and education. But before we get started today, could you just give us a glimpse as to all the different things that you do? I know you have multiple different jobs or different pieces, different facets. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, all the fingers that you have in different pies.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the first thing of EMS, right? Is you have to have 5 jobs or more. Otherwise, it's that, yeah. My name's Chris. Thanks for having me. Amy, it's an honor to be chatting with you about simulation. You're the guru. My background, I've been a career firefighter medic for 20 years now in the system in the DC metro area. And prior to going back to operations, I was the training captain for the department, 1,500 member department. And then prior to that, I helped lift up an in-house paramedic program. So I taught ACLS, the PALS, all the alphabet soup courses. I've done ECG courses. I've done mock code simulation stuff. And then I've kind of over the years modeled and changed it because really, to be honest with you, when I went through medic school, it was throwing a little Annie on the table or an airway Larry on the table or intubating upside down with pans, clapping, and all this other trash that's BS. Or you go to places and somebody tells you about how cool their mannequin is or how cool this is. And it's like, I'd rather see your simulation objectives, or I'd rather see how you immerse a person into the environment versus the tangible items that you spent tons of money on that just sit there, statically in a bed. I think you and I can agree. We love real people as the patients because that's who we treat in real life. But
yeah, at the end of the day, they got to look at those 2 eyes.
Exactly.
And hear the sass or the frustration or the angst or whatever it is in their tone and be able to respond evenly and non-emotionally. I wish I had that.
I know.
Before I became a nurse. That would have helped a lot, I think. You
can pay a lot of money for a mannequin, but none of them really inflect their tone or change their body language or positioning or posture to let you know, like, hey, you're not doing good here, right?
Yeah.
Part of assessments is like dating. You have to read the body language, see how your questions are going. And I think we lose that when we stick to the mannequin or the thing. So I also own a simulation training consulting company. That's how I got linked up with iSimulate. I do their clinical education for the US and then do it for a bunch of other stuff, Stryker, Medtronic, some other companies I help with as well. So yeah, I get a unique opportunity to kind of go out and around, which is kind of fun and see a lot of different things. And I actually have the most fun going to places that start off kind of humble and I don't have any money, and watching how they can make the best stuff out of $2, a Target shopping spree after Halloween for moulage and, just good environmental objectives. So
that's excellent.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. Again, I'm very interested to hear this. You say you've done a lot of travel, and that's as a result of the consulting company. And so that consulting company is really branched out into some of the commercial aspects to help programs get these products integrated or to do better simulation or whatever the case may be. And are you still in that captain role, the training captain role? Or
no, I went back to the field 2 years ago now. So
wow.
So working the street, if you will. And then, so I have very fortunate to have a very good, young, motivated crew where we train all the time. So
that's excellent.
Yep. And they're young, motivated. And the thing I love most about my crew is no matter what the call, lift assist, which usually isn't just a lift assist, it's usually some other thing that's triggered it, right?
Right.
All the way to the fire. They are just good, positive bedside manner. They don't care. So I genuinely like that because I find in a lot of industries, people are tricked, right? It's part of the recruitment. In nursing, you think you go into nursing and you're going to be, cracking chests and doing all this stuff and pushing all these meds and doing all these things. In EMS, it's the same way. You have all these TV shows that make it look like the world almost ends every day. And really, most of the time, it's a person who has no fixed address that you're just helping stay warm in winter, or it's a 99-and-a-half-year-old, World War II veteran who just wants somebody to talk to and make sure that they're taking the appropriate amount of their new blood pressure medication because it's taking them off of their normal rhythm. And to work with a group of people that love and can find the joy in the little things makes the job the most fun.
That's excellent. I mean,
Yeah.
and I will say that's not an easy culture.
It is not.
build.
No,
That is
no.
not an easy culture. I'm an ER nurse, but my husband's a retired paramedic, and I get it. He's also a fire chief here in Delaware, and he says that that's just a culture that he needs to work on each and every day by modeling it, by recognizing when people call in and have some concerns that it's a teaching moment, right? And so that's excellent. Well, congratulations on that. And I have to say that I've recently been saying that I really, really miss the education aspect. So, I've obviously moved into a CEO role.
Yeah.
I've resigned from my academic role. And so I from my perspective, it's like to be able to go back and do some of that simulation education it's almost like, water for a thirsty soul,
Yeah.
I miss it. So I know that the street can call you sometimes, but I respect the fact that, even as you moved up, you're like, hey, let me just go back and, work amongst the people, because I think that sometimes that really does open your eyes to other new things, right? Especially in your consulting role.
Yeah.
So in your consulting role, you said you got to visit lots of places and see lots of things. And, you also talked about how, you were trained versus how simulation education has really evolved in EMS. Can you talk a little bit about how things changed over time from your perspective?
Yeah. So if you've ever heard me talk about simulation, you'll hear me reference Walt Disney. And it's because Disney's Imagineers early on 40s, 50s figured out that you can immerse somebody or trick their brain or create buy-in by triggering 3 or more senses. And for me, I was always a big Disney fan. I was very fortunate to have a family that was able to take us there 3 times growing up. And I would love the details. Like, I'm always into the little details, right? And it's a much, much more fun and experiential time at Disney than it is like a carnival and like a parking lot where you're worried like the bolts are going to rust out and everything's going to fall apart, right? So it's a different degree of like immersion. One is like safety immersion, one is like environmental immersion. So starting out, I remember, there was no competency-based education, and I have not been doing this that long. It was just 1998 when I started. We just did hours. Everything was hours. EMT was hours. How many hours do you get? As if, and we all know time does not equate ability, right? The paramedic curriculum I went through, I was started as an intermediate and went through the paramedic, all hours. Nothing was competency-based, so you didn't have to. Now that's all changed. I personally believe for the better. I know that there is not a lot of money in EMS education. And I know that a lot of instructors have trouble getting staff and trying to meet the competency demands. I have some strategies that I work to help people with on that, in terms of like letting students become the educator, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And so we would just to do our airway skills, we would just throw a little Annie or airway head, under a table, on top of a table, turn the lights down. We were trying to immerse ourselves by upregulating or downregulating a sense. But at the end of the day, it didn't translate to nothing. And when it hit the fan on the street, you didn't have the recallability of that Rolodex of experience because you didn't have it. I was fortunate to have started out when I was 15 and a half and, was doing everything I could to take classes and ride and be busy. And my buddies and I, when we come home from college, we would staff an ambulance during the daytime with the career people and try and just run as much as we could. So, and I also worked in an ER as a tech. So I had a little bit of foundation when I was in the ALS school portion, because I was dropping lines and doing the things. You don't see that. You didn't see that. And you watch a lot of students during their internship just struggle because they would be cognitively loaded very easily. The radio would be going, they'd be asked a question, and then they would be taxed. The caveat to the change is that's a lot more work on the instructor side, but it provides a better product on the student side. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's probably the biggest formal change. I do see a lot of people, as younger instructors come up, there was always a culture of, I'm the instructor, you must hear it from me. I'm the instructor, you must hear it from me. There's a lot of flipped classroom modeling going on. Students preload themselves with the stuff at home, and then they come in and just do the things, which is the way it should be. Nobody should be clicking a freaking PowerPoint and wasting time in person. That should be all tangible skills, social skills, communication skills, career resource management skills, all the things you can't get by yourself, living in your mom's basement. So I think that's probably, flipping the classroom is one of the more trendy things now. But I think as instructors are younger and kind of rolling up into the instructorship and going from adjunct, they see that stuff was crap and they want to change it. And they're motivated. They recognize the fail points. I recognize the fail points I went through, and we want to change it. So putting TVs in your classroom, or putting TVs in your sim room, and putting up a video of traffic or background noise or a rave or something to give contextual relatability. It's just little things, right? And I see that more and more when I go places. I get, like I said, breaks my heart. Oh, I don't have any money. But then they have a TV go, okay, well, what do you do with this? Oh, we play videos of the scene. Perfect. This is a lot better than some big room, gray walled, where somebody's like, hey, pretend you're on the side of 95 at 2 o'clock in the morning. The brain is not designed that way. Especially the adult brain that's like, look, give me what I need to know and let's get through this. I'm on to my next thing. Like the BS filter is very high. And when people are like, just pretend, or they get into the bags and a person didn't restock them and they're like, oh, just pretend you have a blood pressure cuff. Just pretend there's a dentist in there. Just people are like, look, if you don't have the time to invest as an instructor to set this stuff up, I'm not going to buy into your scenario. And that's really and then now you have a wall and you have to break down that wall. And now next time there's going to be a wall because there's that vulnerability of this is crap, right? And I think as time goes on, I see a lot of that getting parsed away. I feel a lot of people spending the energy on just stocking one set of bags and then investing the energy to restock that bag for the next group. I see people trying to make the environment more realistic. I see people trying to not mother goose where the person's turning their head. What's the blood pressure? What's the this? What's the that? They're actually giving it to them, whether it's a simulated system, whether it's a printout of the monitor screen, something like that. So,
yeah. So, I think that's you kind of described my world and why I really transferred into live people in simulation was that I had come from I was an ER nurse, and their task for me was figure out what simulation is and get it integrated into the curriculum. And the more and more I did simulation with mannequins, the more and more I realized, hey, this isn't real. This isn't what they're going to see your face. I mean, obviously you can still do some things, sure. but it was like, they had to suspend so much reality that I was actually concerned that they were carrying things with them into their clinical setting that weren't actually a part of care, right? Because they're novices. And I can remember modeling for them, something, I forget exactly what it was, but let's just say it was trach suctioning. And I struggled to communicate with that mannequin, and I can remember, it was playing back in my head of how many times I said, well, just pretend like it's a real person. Just pretend like it's a real person. Yeah. And the thought in my head was, okay, so you as an experienced clinician, 26 years are having trouble. How can you expect these individuals who have never actually interacted with a person as a client or as a patient to model that, to pretend, right? And so it was one of those things of, I need to help them with this part too. And, that's really where I was like, okay, give me something else. Let's look for some alternatives. And, where obviously all of what I'm doing now is sprung from, but I think the idea of the three senses is really important, right? So, you can have a visual person, or, even in AR, VR, you have a visual, right?
Yep.
But you've got to now come up with some other things. Okay. So visual, auditory. Now what else are we going to hit? Right. That's
my issue with VR right there is exactly where's the tactility, right?
Right.
AR at least provides you that tactility and that environmental awareness where you can have the tangibility of things. That's the thing that always makes me nervous about VR. And we always get the people that come by and they're like, oh, they have this newest VR thing. Okay, show it to me. And then you're hitting the wall, right? Or you're bumping this. And the only time you have tactility is when you're cracking your noggin on the door that you didn't see. So yeah.
They showed us, early on when we were starting Avkin, they showed us some VR pieces and they gave me these things to put in my hands. And I'm like, I can't have things in my hands. I have to use my hands for other things,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I agree with you on that. I haven't had delving into the AR world. I will admit that I haven't had as much experience with that, but I do see more value in that with, and VR may at some point, because they talked about the idea of having gloves where you could use it. I said, but they have to put gloves on over top of the gloves then, and then the gloves have to work, you know, like how is that going to work? So, I mean, again, I think that there's a potential. I mean, you know, with the way technology is going, who knows? But you know, I think that at the end of the day, they are taking care of people, and they've got to learn how to do that, right? And so I agree with you on that one. And so, you know, you talked about some of the things where you can go to Target after Halloween, which, you know, this should be airing probably right around after Halloween time, and get some things that are moulage. So what would you recommend that they look for as far as, you know, discounts?
So I always recommend the things, just any of the things. The wounds and the blood is probably the biggest one. I'm not a big, like, make everything spurt over the wall blood, but I do love a good wound that has blood on it, so that when they go and they touch it with their glove and they put direct pressure and elevate and all the right, that when they're done, they're like, oh crap, my glove is bloody. And then they go to do things, and now they understand, okay, that's why you double up on a trauma, or that's why you have your glove pouch behind you so you can drop away and grab a new set, right? So probably glove and wounds are the big ones. It's always cool, like you can get the teeth, you know, and then your wearable teeth, crack one out. So if a person has facial trauma, now they have to appreciate a loss of a tooth, you know, is that new, is that old, you know? Did you only have 2 tooths before, or did you have, you know, all the full set? So just that kind of stuff. The wigs are good. I think you get $25 and you can restock a lot of your trauma supplies pretty well.
Yeah, and I would also say the idea of being able to create bruises, you know, I mean, like that idea is like, you know, so it doesn't even have to just be the blood. It could be even just like the green and the purples and the yellows. And, you know, you can do a lot with that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think it's Ben Nye that makes, like, they're kind of the higher end moulage, but they could, you know, I remember getting a moulage kit from them from, I think, like $150, and it lasted 3 or 4 years because there's, you know, you invest a little bit, but it lasts a long, long time. And you restock some of the things that you use all the time, like the bruise wheel and the blood wheel.
But I do change the gauze so that you're not
right. And I think what you were talking about, the idea of like going back to what the objectives are, right? And knowing how that the objectives are going to impact their learning, because I think that, you know, the idea of having blood on that wound and, you know, applying the direct pressure and recognizing that it is something that warrants that and things along those lines is great. But even just the idea of the impact of that, you know, did they get it on their sleeve? Did they get it on their arm? In addition, like, were they not recognizing that they needed to pull up a sleeve or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. And that consequential learning, like, that's a prime example of, if you don't do it and you just have the person, you know, check the skill off in the middle of the room with no gloves on, everybody's going to ace it. But at 2 a.m, when the person is on blood thinners and it's cold out and they just haven't stopped, and you got to put, you're done. And teaching or providing the opportunity to learn consequential learning is probably one of the most powerful things. Just by requiring them to not scene safe BSI, you know, my friend Katie O'Connor from UCLA, she calls them jazz hands. She's like, scene safe BSI, me and my partner, and you know, the only patient they signed trauma. Is actually having them. Like, I don't care if you say it. You got it on. If you get squirted in the eye, then you fail BSI, right? Like, just make it real. If at 2 a.m, you would be sending the safety officer a exposure report, and it was something you could have controlled, then that you don't pass BSI at that point. And then people will be prepared.
So in your travels, in your consultation, where would you say are some of the most forward-thinking simulation education programs? Where would you know, if you were to tell someone who really wanted to get into that immersive simulation education, where would you point them?
Of course, in Virginia, but North Carolina, South Carolina, from the EMS program perspective. There's a handful in West Virginia that are pretty impressive. Tennessee, really, in like the Murfreesboro area, like Columbia State, they have a lot of good throughput on their quality of product that they provide. Massachusetts area, like Florida. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the big hitters. Oregon, there's a couple in Oregon. Rogue or Community College in Oregon, just phenomenal. Like they go outside. Like I get excited when somebody doesn't just walk me to the sim lab and say, "Hey, here's our sim lab." Like, where do you guys do your simulations? Oh, we do them in the parking lot. We do them in the bathroom. We do them in the da 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 da. Okay, that's cool. They also have Rogue specifically has unique. They have a like a lumber school in the school, so where they teach lumber. So they have like lumber piles. They have a lot of mechanic stuff outside, and they just use it. They just go out and use it. So it doesn't require any ready up time. It's from a time management perspective. It's, hey, are you guys using this today? No. Can we use it? Yes. And then you go out and use it, right? So it's very fluid and flexible, but it also, from instructorship, doesn't require a lot of prep and reset. You just go out there. So that's the kind of stuff that gets me kind of jazzed.
Yeah. As we're selling our app birth into more places, one of the places in North Carolina, and the name escapes now, but their training officer purchased our app birth so that they could do a homeless encampment. So it's a postpartum hemorrhage with a homeless encampment and I just love that concept and that idea.
It was Durham EMS.
Yep. Nate's got me on that. I think we're paused.
How about now?
Oh,
There you go.
can you hear? Did you hear me or no?
Yep. I heard you stop at North Carolina, but I forget and then it broke off.
Okay. So let me just go back to that. So one of the programs in Durham, North Carolina, it's actually Durham. Nate informed me, but they purchased our app birth, and it's a homeless encampment. So it's a woman giving birth in a homeless encampment with a postpartum hemorrhage, and they have to recognize that it's a postpartum hemorrhage and that time is of the essence, and all of that. And so, I love hearing the different ways that EMS is integrating the Avkin products, because I think that it's the thing that adds the like, so they don't do it indoors in their training facility. They go out into the woods and take care of, she's on the ground, she's delivering this baby, so it is one of those things of like, let's do it in places where it's actually going to happen, and the inconvenience of the weather, the inconvenience of,
lighting,
what the environment is like.
Smell,
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's
and even the resources, what do you have available to you? You don't even have a sink, there's nothing there. So, I think
warmer,
that it's
nothing. Yep.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I love hearing different ways to think about integrating. Like, you can't take this thing and go throw it into the pond or anything, but you can definitely take it outside. And so one of the things that we did at the University of Delaware were mass casualty incidents. And that obviously had some benefit for the nursing program, more so for them understanding if they were in a hospital that had near a mass casualty incident, what that flow was going to look like, or what was happening at the scene, so they could understand why hundreds of people were coming through the door. So as far as from an EMS perspective, doing a mass casualty incident, whether it's an interdisciplinary or it's even single disciplinary, I assume you guys would end up working with fire and EMS on this at least.
Yeah.
What are the benefits for the EMS learners in that situation?
Yeah. So I think the benefits depend on the prep. If, we work right next to a large, very large airport, international airport. So they have their FAA requirements where they're required to do it. So we have the opportunity to do it with them. We also do it in county where I work. I've helped other places do it as well. I think to kind of start off with one thing to lead into that, one downside or concern I always have when somebody says, hey, I want to do an MCI, is I always find them wanting to do 60 plus patients or 50 plus patients, right? To be honest with you, you can do 8 plus patients and you tax most systems anywhere, and that doesn't include all reds where they're on death's door. That can be 2 reds, 3 yellows, and the rest are walking wounded, and you're essentially chasing the chickens around the chicken yard. And that's real life. You put them on the side of an interstate, you put them in a loud environment where you lose audible communication, you have to go to digital communication, and that stuff can crash. I think the MCIs are most fruitful in terms of objective outcomes and takeaways when the learners have been primed with what they're going to be given. Look, we're going to run a plane crash tomorrow. It's going to have it's going to be a Cessna 208 Caravan. It's going to have 8 people. It's going to have luggage under the base. It's going to have a full tank of fuel because it will just be taking off on climb out. And that's what we're going to run. So, and then letting the crews a week before, tour before, 2 tours, talk about what are they going to do. Well, I want to be ready with tourniquets. I want to be ready with airway supplies. I need to be concerned for burn. I need to have a suppression. I need to have, zones, a warm, hot, cold zone set up. So where I can work, where I can't, where's a danger, where's a threat, and then run them through it. Where I don't think it does well is where it's a surprise blitzkrieg sim where they send them and then they expect everything to fall into place. Is that how it's going to happen on the street? Yes, that's how it's going to happen on the street. But if the individuals know what they're getting into, learn from it, that will now resonate downrange after the scenario is long gone, because they'll say, hey, here's what we did. Here's what we were prepped for. Here's what we knew would happen. I'm always, when I was in the running training, we would always send out everything we were going to do at Con Ed weeks before, so providers can say, hey, we're going to do birth. Hey, we're going to do this. Hey, we're going to do a revisit on crates. Hey, we're going to do this new procedure. Here's a video on it. We'd make little videos, put it on the LMS, and then people would be primed. So they didn't come in vulnerable and nervous and scared. Like, oh crap, what are we going to do? They knew exactly what we're going to do. So I think for the MCIs, it's either, if people are prepped and primed, they get a lot of takeaways because they get a lot of good conversation and they're positive because they're not as vulnerable. If they're hit with it and they didn't know and it kind of unravels bad, I think it all depends on how the debrief goes. And if the debrief sucks, then you're going to get a lot of negative connotation and people that aren't positive and optimistic about it. If the debrief goes good, then I think people will formulate it and then go back and talk through and work through the things. I've watched a lot of those go bad, in that there was too much of trying to do trickery, and that going back to the objective stuff in the beginning, and not to stand on a soapbox, which I don't think anybody in today's world knows what a soapbox is anymore. But so many times people try and do trickery or watch people fail and fumble as like a preservative mechanism for them having done something poor, and they want to watch other people fail and it validates their performance, and that's not the case. And there's also unrealistic expectations. You can't put a crew of 3 that all have a summative experience set of 3 years and expect them to perform like a crew of 3 that all have 20 years, 60 years of experience. And just watching them fail just kind of frustrates me. So, So I think it's twofold. I think it can be good. I think it can be bad. I think at the end of the day, people can learn to appreciate what cognitive load is and can be. Yeah.
So I think you bring up a really interesting point. And, the whole idea of pre-briefing.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of psychological safety is there, right? Like, those are the undertones of what you're putting in there. And I never thought about it from that perspective, from an EMS perspective. As a nursing educator, I'm dealing with novice learners, and I want to make sure that I am giving them all that they can do to be successful, right? Because, if you look at the Harvard medical, statements of, we believe that everybody is doing their very best and all of those things. And when there is potentially some intentionality of, let me make this really hard, or let me amp this up, right? Which I think potentially happened even before the healthcare standards of best practice came up, of like, let's give us some really hard stuff to see, to show them what they're going to face. And, let's not tell them all about it, and then, we ended up really frustrating some people in the process, and potentially turning people away from the healthcare professions. And you're talking about this even in a perspective of experienced medics, maybe not, maybe a few years out, but experienced medics, and giving them this scene ahead of time. And what I heard you elaborating on is actually giving them time to process and think through what they would do if there was an emergency, so that if the time comes, in a real sense, on the way to the scene, they've already thought this through in a non-emergent perspective, right? But they've already said, okay, I've got to have tourniquets, I've got to do these things, I've got to make sure that this is set up, I've got to do these things, right? And so my husband is as I mentioned, a retired medic and also a fire chief, and he was going to a scene as the fire chief, but it was a mall and it was a shooting, and it was supposedly 8 people shot. And so he was in his mind processing about, okay, this is what I'm going to need. This is how I'm going to need to do it. And it was people all over the mall. It wasn't like one, like the food court or something. It was all over the place. Sure. And so I said, how did you because I hear the call, he gets up, he goes, and I'm like freaking out because I would not know what to do. And he said, well, I just did all the things that I would have done prior to this when this or that happened, because he worked in the city of Wilmington in Delaware. And so he had been around shootings in his day, but it is that you draw on those past experiences. And so what you're almost doing is intentionally giving them that experience or that time to think it through without it being, I have 5 minutes to figure this out, but giving them a couple of days to figure it out so that when they're recalling it for the next time, it's already have been worked through in their mind because they've had this opportunity. And so, it's not just a paper drill. You're putting them, you're testing them with it, but you're also giving them the time to process it because they may have not even had that in their training and education as a medic.
Well, let me give you a context too, because everything you said revolves around this little thing called mental rehearsal. And let's say you just graduated school and you were a phenomenal basketball player. And let's say it was signing day. Amy is going to go play for whoever. And you're signing and you're reading through your contract. And let's say you get page 90 of your contract and it says, Amy, as part of your contract, you will be required to go back and watch game footage of yourself, your opponent for post week, next week, and you'll be required to go through the next set of plays. So in this professional sports industry where they make a little bit of money and they have some decent stakes on the line, it's all relative to everybody. It is required for them to go back and watch themselves, watch the teams, and then go back and play out those plays for the next team. So essentially what they've done in the professional sports industry is made it a requirement for mental rehearsal and self-reflection. So if we preload that and then follow up with that, we're also exposing the brain to more opportunities of learning that don't require that building out of deployment of that MCI. So the key is teaching people how to do this, right? People do this all the time. Like, remember when before you went on your first date with your husband and he's like, hey, I want to take you to this really good place. Were you not running plays through your head of what you would say or how much you're going to tell this guy or, right? We do this all the time. We do this when I'm going to go to work. If traffic's bad, I'm going to go this way, right? We do this, but what we don't do is this for our job. And some of it's preservative, right? So sometimes I know all the time, actually, when you come back from a call, you want to sit down and kind of joke and kind of down throttle yourself. But if we teach people it's okay to recap like that, and we teach people to be open and honest and explorative with their conversation with their crew, we can help a lot of this. I think we can help a lot of this mental health stress that we put on ourselves, because we need to make it okay to talk about it. And if we talk about it and we know we're all on the same page, then I can read when Amy's having a bad day and I know, hey, what's going on? Home or work? Home. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll back off today, or I'll kind of ease your burn. And so if we teach people how to do mental rehearsal and we teach people how to do that explorative conversation before and after, we take that 3 or 4 hour MCI and we make it into 8 hours worth of mental cycling. And the more we can fill those Rolodexes in the brain with experiences, the better people will perform under stress. And to your husband's point, he was very confident and comfortable with the one person getting shot. He just broke that scene into 8 one persons getting mm-hmm. shot. And that's all you do. That's the key. And that's what I was getting at about as long as people understand, I put a bunch of tourniquets on. Putting a bunch of tourniquets on at one time is just putting a bunch of tourniquets on right? If people have the confidence and comfort and the skill set they're going to deploy in that big thing, they'll do just fine, because they'll roll back every time they come across the next person and they'll recognize, okay, I got to put an MP in. Is the person breathing now? Nope. Black. Next. Go the next person. What's RPM? What's respirations, pulse, mentation? And then they just go through and they teach it. And you can do that at the station level. You can do that at the crew level. You can do that walking through the ER with the rookie and just going, hey, what's the RPM of that person in the room? As they walk past the patient's room, heart rate's 102, person's unconscious and intubated, and they can cycle back what they would need to do, right? They can just do that. Just go out and eat lunch with your shift and just ask them body language questions. And now when they get in the context of that scenario, they understand, hey, that person has a defensive stance. Perfect. So they're primed, right? Their pupils are dilated. I'd increase your distance while you're conversing with that person. Just the little things of everyday communication, and just what would you do ifs? We love to do that. What would you do if? Well, if that car rolled, okay, I would boop, 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 boop. What's your concern? Boop, 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 right? Just rehearsing. And then you can condition people to do that on the way home. It's no different than when we all first learned IVs. Every single, my wife will tell you, I'm always like, dang girl, you got a big AC. Like I could drop a 14 in there, right? And you walk around town and you see people's hands and you're like, ooh, I put a 16 in there. It's the same thing, right? You start to see houses. Okay, well, if this was on fire, if that was on fire, if this was gas. Once you break that mindset down, it's so easy to perform with those individuals, because they're already faster, more fastly cycling, because they're trying to go through their recall faster, because they're conditioned. They're conditioned to look at things as opportunities and how they would adjust, just like your husband did. Oh, it's 8 people. Okay. That's eight incidents, right? I need to have 8 crews, or I need to break apart 8 strike teams to go after those 8 people. Easy, not fun, but he made it a chunkable, what do they say? How to eat a hippo, one bite at a time. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think the idea of the recall is so important. I feel like we need to do that more in nursing education. I tried to do it very much in my clinical, when I would bring the students into clinical, of talking through, how is the day going to go? I had them do concept maps and things like that to try to anticipate or be able to have everything put together. But I think the more that can be done, as far as direct patient care, and obviously translates to simulation as well, I think is really super helpful. I think of it as developmental level, of like, you get to the point where you as a new medic, you or whatever, new novice nurse, whatever, you're, everything's great. You're ready to go. You can't wait to get started. And then, you kind of hit a few bumps in the road where you have patients that have either mental health issues or, complex patient care issues. And, this isn't clinical anymore, where I have 1 or 2 patients, or, I have an instructor there to really help me along. And then, you kind of get your feet up underneath of you. But then when variables get added in, like it's now pitch black and you're on the side of a major highway or something, those pieces really come in. So the idea of like, okay, well, let's take what you learned, in a more controlled setting, and as far as memory call, let's put that on the side of the road at 2:00 in the morning before it actually happens. And what could you do? What are resources that you have at your disposal that could aid you in this, right? Like different places are going to have different resources. Do you have road crews that can come with lights? Do you have, I would assume like additional emergency vehicles that can point their headlights towards the scene, or whatever the case may be. But I think that idea of like, before it happens, let's talk about it, so that, oh yeah, we talked about this. This is something that could happen. And
what do you actually have to do in the ditch? And what do you need to rule out, prioritize, get off the deck, and get in the back of that controlled environment, or more controlled environment, right? Like teaching people, you don't have to do all of this, all of that. You brought up a thing before my ADD kicks in. We at the clinical challenges that we do ENA, NTI, EMS World, AMTC, Echo. We used your birthing simulator at EMS World, and ENA was phenomenal. We actually, Matt Wolkenbright, a friend of mine, he's in Western Massachusetts. He, big simulation guru. He actually just became an EMS chief. he actually had the idea to get Axon body cams to help us out. Like, we don't get any money from them. So I'm saying this fully, whatever. We started using the body cams and the body cam glasses and giving the participants the video afterwards. The amount of emails and text messages he got, because he was the one that sent it, like, people were floored with like where their head goes, when they're wearing it, or what their position or their inflection and their tone, or they could hear the trill in their voice when they started to get stressed. And I mean, body cams, they're not that expensive. They're very easy to use. It's on, it's filming, it's like a fisheye view. So it's like a good, really good context. We actually started putting them on the IV poles and doing them down in like the in-hospital competitions, because the video is freaking good and the audio is really good. That's one thing people can do super easy, is just get a couple body cams, run your scenarios, and then just don't say anything. Send the video footage to the participants, the students, and let them self-reflect. And the amount of stuff, because we use iPads at work, we don't have the body cams. When we deployed that model, we deployed it our first paramedic program. It's technically the second paramedic program. We did it completely, where the students were given an iPad, and as part of their scenario, somebody would film them. And Donna Speaks, who's the PA that helped get that program off the deck, she is phenomenal. She's the one that actually put me on the path of objective-based education. We came in thinking, okay, well, we hate being filmed. We don't want to watch ourselves be filmed. So the students are probably the same way. So we'll let them take the video back. We'll let them, on their own time. What we walked into the next morning, so we have round tables in the classroom, is the students huddled around each other. Like, look what I did here. Don't do that. Oh my God, look what I did here. Hang on, go back. Look, you did it again. Look at how you're repeating this behavior. And we're like, because we were like, okay, well, we want to make this only you have access, as the individual. And they were just like, because they're an Instagram, Twitter world, they're used to it. And it was amazing, like, just watching them, like, yeah, don't do this. And they'll like zoom in and be like, oh, you shouldn't have gone for that one. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
And the professional sports industry requires it. They have tune-up coaches that will literally sit with you and say, hey, look, the reason you're throwing the ball to the right is because you're planting your foot pointing to the right. You need to plant your foot straight and throw your shoulder into it and release on the same plane. They'll like mark it up. It's called Coach's Eye, is one of the apps that's really cheap on there. And they'll draw it up and like say, hey, look, here's why you're missing that receiver on their post route. Because when they cut, you're planting towards where they were, not where they're going. So the ball's, missing them. Why aren't we doing that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's excellent. That's so cool. And so were they doing it with the sense of competition, where they were showing their team the mistakes they made, so that with the competition, or are you just saying just in general education? So the
team, them showing their cowork was the classroom, the paramedic students and the EMT students. And then we also do it for internship at work. The teams, it was just two of them. They were texting Matt back like, hey man, that's crazy. I did not even realize that. And that was the trigger point for us to use them for everyone, because it was people that had a lot of trouble in the scenario calling, thanking us for the opportunity to see the other side of the fence and how they perform. And it's just, it's refreshing to me, because I think in a very type A world, there's always that kind of, when you run a competition, you're always worried about the people that just want to argue everything. When you give them, like, I look at, the old announcer we used to have in the DC area, he would always say, let's go to the videotape. Mm-hmm. And you give it to him, and it's like, hey, I'm not going to give you my interpretation, anything. I'm just going to give it to you. Sure. Self-reflect. You can delete it if you want, watch it if you want. The amount of people that watch it are like, holy shit, I did not even realize I stepped on the patient twice, So
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I did a very similar thing with fundamentals. They did 4 simulations, and they had to watch the videos. They had to watch their videos, but nobody else. They had password protected. And then they, at the end of those 4, they're very similar, and it was diversity simulations. But they had to basically take and write a summary of their progress over the course of the semester. Yeah. And it was they loved watching. Yeah. They're like, I had no idea. And to me, I thought it was a really positive reinforcement for them to be able to see how they improved in their simulation experiences and therefore carry that into their clinical practice. Yeah. So I love it. So just real quick, because we're running out of time, but I want to hear a little bit, because I don't ever get to go to these competitions. Tell me a little bit about how AvBirth is being used in some of the competitions and what people are saying about it.
Some of the adjectives they use because of the realism, I won't say on your podcast, but so we used at ENA, EMS World. ENA, the one I was running the lane, so that's the one I'm most familiar with. The patient comes in, abdominal pain. It was essentially the proverbial, I didn't know I was pregnant. So the individual wearing it they were complaining of retroperitoneal pain. So kind of that non-focused lateral pain. And just kind of like, and then like kind of guarding forward, had a blanket over top. Tachycardic, blood pressure was a little bit lower, so would be appropriate for the stage of trimester. A little tachypnic from the pain, also to help with the blood drawing back up. And no history, no meds, no allergies. And some of the teams, it took a second to check underneath the curtain, if you will. And they were doing a very good job talking to her, but they were kind of affixing on the pain, and they wanted to know if a CAT scan had been done and if ultrasound had come, and can they do a POCUS and all this other stuff. She's like, sure. So we had video set up for that. And of course, what they find is a little baby, staged to deliver head first. And they're like, so when they lift up, there's bleeding, baby delivers, hyper-realistic baby. They clamp, cut. They all did a very good job pulling the baby to the side, keeping it warm. The thing I love the most, and the thing I wish we would do a lot more in the world of maternal delivery, is take care of mom. She's the one that's been, building this baby for 9 months. And the hyperfixation on the new thing that just popped out always seems to be kind of the draw point. So we actually at work, my crew, the engine driver is the one that's responsible for staying with mom. So there's the one that has the hand on the shoulder talking. If she stops talking less, our concern is cycle that blood pressure. Let's get that end tidal. Let's see if she's not bleeding. Yours is phenomenal because it'll just keep bleeding. And I call it the pitcher pot effect. So, the pelvic bolt goes down and vagina's up top only until she leans forward or back. Mm-hmm. Will she actually pitcher pot? And the caveat being, all of the maternal beds in today's world do this. So it's anti-pitcher pot. So they did good. One group actually got her almost to the edge of the bed and kind of did that, squatty in the corner, how it's been happening for thousands of years approach, which I thought was good. And they actually saw that the bleeding didn't stop. Made a little bit of mess on the exhibit hall floor, but that's okay.
It's washable. It's
washable. Yeah. So that's, and then they did really good. Then they managed mom once they saw mom kind of crash. And then every group split the crew. So every group put 2 on the baby, and they did the APGAR and the dry stem warm. And then the rest of the group, depending on how big they were, managed mom. So
gotcha. I'm glad to hear a little bit about how it's being received, because
it's being received very well.
One, I'm an ER nurse, so again, love to hear about the ENA and what they're doing. But also, 2, because we ran them as fast to labor and delivery as we could. We didn't want that in the ER.
Yeah.
It happened a few times, but so I love to know more about how it's being integrated, especially in emergency situations. Yeah. So
well,
I appreciate you giving me a little briefing.
We did preface them with you're in a critical access hospital or outlying hospital. So when they're like, where's OB? They're 32 miles that way at university, right? And they're like, no. And it's like, right. Yes, it's okay. Yeah, right. Right. Keep the basics, ABC, right? Yeah. It was good.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. And, again, I think it's amazing what can be done in simulation. And, obviously my passion and my love is live people in simulation with hybrid. So having that really positive information at the end made my day. Yeah. But I appreciate your focus on the fact with education that we've got to get to the objectives. We've got to think about cognitive load. We've also got to think about memory recall. And again, from my perspective, it's like, that's something I've got to, as an educator, I've got to think back on a little bit more and maybe even include it in our simulation. So again, great time, great knowledge. Appreciate all that you do for simulation and making it great.
Thanks
all right, well, have a great day.
You too.